Welcome back to Information Tech with Dave. In this video, we will be exploring the Linux file system hierarchy. Like any other modern operating system, Linux organizes its file system into a hierarchy that you'll need to know how to navigate before you can administer or troubleshoot a system. Before we get into the video, I'm making the assumption that you already have access to a Linux system, either running directly on hardware or as a virtual machine, also known as a VM, on either your computer or accessible over a network. In this video, we'll be logging into a Linux VM running Rocky Linux 8 using a secure shell connection and working on the command line. It's worth mentioning that because there are many different Linux distributions, the exact directory structure can vary somewhat. Rocky is based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, so what you see in this video should also apply to RHEL and its derivatives like Fedora, CentOS, Alma Linux, Oracle Linux, and Scientific Linux. Debian Linux and its derivatives have slightly different file system structures, but the basics are the same. This would apply to distributions like Ubuntu or Kali. First, we'll SSH to the system. My laptop is a Mac, and the terminal program that I use for accessing other devices on networks is called Zoc. Now, this is a commercial program that I've been using for a number of years. I'm a big fan of it. It's available for both Mac and Windows, but it does cost money, and you do not need to use this. Free terminal options for Mac users include the built-in terminal application or iTerm2. Windows users can use PuTTY, which is free. I'll post the links to these programs in the video description. So what we'll do is we'll pull up my host directory, and we've selected the virtual machine that I'm going to be secure shelling to. Click connect, and here we are. We're in the command line on this virtual machine. Now that we're logged in, let's see where we are on the system. By default, when you log into a Linux system, you're put into the home directory of your user account. My user account on this system is Dave, and so I'm in the Dave home directory. Now, if you're on a system and you're not quite sure where exactly you are, you can simply enter in the pwd command, which stands for Present Working Directory. And what that does, and I'll highlight that here, is it displays the full path to where you are. So this is the Dave home directory. If the system has other users on it, say it's a multi-user system, their accounts will also be located within /home. So the first way to see what's in /home is to type the full path, and we use the cd command, which stands simply for change directory. cd/home. Now we're in the home directory, essentially one layer above my own home directory, the home/Dave. Now if we go back to home Dave, another way that we can move one level up the directory structure is to use cd command, but just type 2 periods. And what that does is it brings you one level up. So again, we'll check that with pwd, and you can see we're in /home. No matter where we are in the file system hierarchy, if we want to go back to our home directory, all you need to do is type cd. And let's confirm that. And there we are. Now, Windows users may be familiar with the command dir, D-I-R. That works on some Linux systems. And as you can see, it does here. However, what this is on a Linux system usually is what's called an alias. The native Linux directory listing program is called ls. And you'll notice that when we use ls instead of dir, the two entries here are in a different color. And what this is signifying is that those are subdirectories of the current directory. Now, one of the things I've always found is that if you're in a directory with a whole lot of files and subdirectories, if you issue ls without any options on it, you just get this big blob of information. And it's a lot easier if you present that in some order. So what I like to do is use the -l command. And as you can see, what that does is it presents you with more information, and it presents you with information in a little bit more digestible format. So we'll get into things like this and this in a later video, but just for now, essentially what this does, what this tells you is the D in the beginning says that it's a directory. The R's and the W's and the X's relate to file permissions. Dave and Dave here mean that it's owned by the user Dave in the group Dave. And then finally over here, we have the name of the directory itself. And also, if you're completely new to Unix type systems, then you should know that a directory is the same thing as a folder. So if you're coming from a Mac background or you're coming from a Windows background, a directory is a folder, is a directory. It's all the same. Now, another option that you can use is the -a. And you see here, now all of a sudden, it's displaying some files here that we didn't see previously. These are what are called dot files, and these are hidden files. They are not normally shown. And then what you can do is you can also combine a couple of different options. So if we do lsal or lsla, it gives us that long format, and it also displays the hidden files. So what these are here are these files are related to the bash shell, which stands for Born Again Shell, which is the shell that we're using to interface with the system. Essentially, it's a command line interpreter. There are many different kinds of shells, which, once again, that's beyond the scope of this video. The vast majority of Linux systems, the default shell on it is bash. Now, say you've got your screen and you've got a whole bunch of stuff on it and you just want to kind of clear it out. There's a couple of different options. One is you can simply type the word clear, or even simpler is you press the Control and the L key at the same time, like this, and now it's cleared your screen. A similar command in a Windows command prompt would be CLS. So let's go back up to home and pull up a directory listing and then try to change into another user's home directory. So remember, I mentioned that you can use cd ... to go up one level. Now let's see what's in here. We see there are two user home directories. There's mine, the one named Dave, and then there's another one called test. Now what happens if we try to change into somebody else's directory? Permission denied. And this is a concept that you'll have to learn about in Linux. This is something that is very similar to Windows and Macs in that everything on the machine has permissions associated with it. So just as a regular user, I can't go access somebody else's files. They may have personal documents in there, and they may not want me looking at it. Likewise, you could have personal items in your own home directory, and you don't want everybody else on the system snooping all over it. Now, if we were to need to get into that test directory, there's a couple different options. One, the test user could add us essentially as an authorized user or person who can access those files by adding me to a group, or we can use elevated privileges. And again, these are somewhat advanced concepts beyond the scope of this video, and so we're not going to get into them right now, but this just gives you an idea of something that you may run into on a Linux system when you're trying to navigate around. So let's go back to our home directory, and again, once more, all we need to do is type cd. And pwd shows us that we're in our home directory. Now let's see what we have here. We have two subdirectories. We've got one called documents and one called downloads. Now, if we go into documents, and unfortunately right now I'm going to do something that you can't see because I'm just showing you my computer screen, but I'm going to use something called tab completion. So if I type this and then I just hit the tab key, it completes it, and then I can go into my directory. Now if I want to use tab completion again, as you can see, both directories start with the letter DO. So if I type only DO and I hit it twice, it'll show me the two options. So I need to specify a little bit more of the file name. But tab completion is really handy when you're moving around the system, you're trying to get stuff done in a hurry, and it can save you a fair amount of typing. So let's see what's in this directory. We have 3 files. I wonder if there are any hidden files. Nope, there's no hidden files in this directory. So right now, we're not really going to go over how to view the contents of files. It can depend on what kind of file it is, but I will just quickly show you the contents of file 1. There's not a whole lot there. We're going to use the cat command for that. We're going to use file completion again. And it says there's not much here. All it is a simple text file. So what if we want to go and we want to check out what's in the downloads directory? We could just go up to the next level directory, our home directory, and then change down into the downloads directory. Or we could do it like this. And now we're in the downloads directory. So you can see what this did was essentially is we typed in the full path to the downloads directory, but instead of having to type in /home, we used the ... shortcut. So this can be pretty handy if you're trying to find something and the system utilities aren't helping you out much and you're hopping between a bunch of subdirectories in a master directory. This is very handy. So let's see if there's anything here. Apparently not. But remember what I said about hidden files? We have 3 hidden files here. Now, there's nothing in any of them, and you can see this column here represents the size. It's a 0-byte file. There's nothing in it. So let's go back to our home directory. So now that we've done some basic directory navigation and touched on the concept of permissions, let's go all the way up to the top of the file system hierarchy, see what's there, and then start exploring that so that we understand what the functions of these different directories that you're going to see on Linux systems is. So the top level directory on any Linux system or any Unix system is represented by a /. So depending upon who you're talking to, this is sometimes just called /, And some people will refer to it as the root directory. However, that can get a little bit confusing because there actually is a directory called /root. So let's do a directory listing here. As I mentioned, there is a directory called root. And what that is that's the home directory for the root user. On a Unix system, root is the name of the account that has full administrative rights on the system. So we have this directory listing, and we have, which we're in the root directory, but not the /root directory. I'm not going to try to go into /root because I'll get a permission denied error. So let's take a look at what these different directories are. And we're just going to go in alphabetical order. So the first one is /bin, which stands for binary. And in this one, this here is actually a link so that the directory is actually under user bin. But what this does is it contains system utilities like binary files. So let's go there. And what we have here are basically a bunch of different utilities, things that are necessary to the operation of the system. So let's go back up to /root, clear the screen, and what's next? Boot. Boot, it contains files that are necessary for the system to actually boot up. These include the Linux kernel, something called initrd, which is the initial RAM disk, and bootloader configuration files. A bootloader is a very low-level program that talks to the hardware, essentially, and tells it how to get the operating system up and running. Next one we're going to look at is /dev, and this is where device files are located. They represent physical and virtual devices on the system. They facilitate communication between the kernel and devices. And I've mentioned the word kernel a couple of times. The kernel is essentially the very core of the operating system. So when we say Linux, properly what we're referring to is the kernel. In general use, though, if we say Linux, we're generally talking about a distribution, but to be most proper, we're talking about the actual operating system kernel itself. The next one is /etc or etc. And if you're a Windows user, and if you're maybe a little bit of a power user, you're familiar with the concept of the Windows registry. Well, that's where it contains all sorts of configuration files related to the operation of the system and the current user. etc is similar to that on a Linux system. It contains both subdirectories and also configuration files that are related to configuration of the system itself and oftentimes programs that are running on it. We've already talked about /home. So the next two we're going to take together, lib and lib64. And what these are compilations of essential shared libraries that are required by the binaries in bin and sbin that they need when they're running. It also, under the /lib/modules directory, may include kernel modules. So the difference between lib and lib64 is that lib64 contains these libraries that are necessary for programs that are using the x86 64 instruction set, essentially 64-bit programs. Media and MNT or mount are mount points. What that means is when you install or when you connect a device, a storage device to your computer, before it can be read from or written to, it needs to be mounted. So media contains mount points for things like floppy disks, CDs, DVDs, or even stuff like zip drives. So that tells you how long Linux has been around, and it still maintains backwards compatibility for those. Mount, or MNT, is a bit more generic, and typically under Mount you would see USB drives or network shares that could be mounted there. Next one is /opt, and opt is short for optional. So generally speaking, what you'll see in there is optional software, third-party software, stuff that you install on your system that doesn't ship with the actual distribution you're using. The next one we'll look at is /proc, and proc is short for process. This is a virtual file system. It provides information about system processes and kernel parameters and allows dynamic interaction with the kernel. We talked a little bit about /root and how it's off limits to most other people on the system. These are the files that belong to the actual root user. /run is a relatively recent addition to the Linux file system. Again, it's sort of a virtual file system. It's not something you really need to worry about right now, but it relates to some of the underlying system functions. SBIN are system binaries that are important for how the system runs. /serve is designated for data files served up by the system, and it's often used for services like FTP or HTTP, where the data is distinct from other file systems. /sys is yet another virtual file system, and this one's related to the kernel. Temp is, or TMP, pronounced temp, is a file system, or I should say a directory, that contains temporary data, and it's stuff that it gets put in there that doesn't need to survive a reboot. /usr, or user, contains user-related programs, libraries, documentation, and binaries. It's a very important directory. Frequently it gets actually mounted on a separate disk partition so that system upgrades can be done without affecting the user data. And then the last thing that we'll do is, or we'll look at, is /var. So /var is used for variable data that can change during the system runtime. These could be logs, spool files for printers, various temporary data. So if we go into that, you can see that we've got a bunch of different subdirectories in here as well. Oh. What we've got here are a whole bunch of different log files. These can be important for troubleshooting problems on the system, or if you're involved in a cybersecurity incident investigation, there may be clues to who did something bad on your system in here. So that's a brief overview of the Linux file system hierarchy and how to get around it. So hopefully now you understand how to show the contents of directories on Linux and how to navigate around the system using a few command line tools. Understanding the Linux file system hierarchy is essential for navigating the system efficiently and managing resources effectively. Whether you're an enthusiast, system administrator, or a software developer, you need a solid grasp of these directories so that you have a good grasp of how to configure, troubleshoot, and maintain a Linux-based system. It's also important, especially if you're a software developer, that when you're writing something, you know where different things go on the system. So thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. If you found this helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share the video. There's more to come.